When President Ramaphosa delivered his first SONA in 2018, there was excitement about the country's economic prospects, with the feeling described as Ramaphoria at the time.
Now, in every one of the State of the Nation addresses since then, a lot of these promises have been kind of reiterated, but people have become extremely disillusioned that they are not seeing those promises being translated into properly implemented courses of action that would have seen a turnaround in the economy.
The energy sector was a key priority area in President Ramaphosa's SONA address last year, in which he also announced his decision to create the position of a Minister of Electricity to help resolve the country's load-shedding problems. Analysts say he'll need to use this year's SONA to account for the progress that's been made so far.
We want to see if Eskom is now turning the corner, or when the president expects Eskom to turn the corner. And obviously with Eskom, you know, the numbers will tell the truth. You can't try and create things that are not there. So we'll be expecting an update on what's going on at Eskom, in particular with the government support to Eskom's balance sheet, if that's been rolled out and if it's visibly starting to have an impact on the operations at Eskom.
Black Business says 30 years into the country's democracy, it's a significant time for there to be what it calls an economic reset on the part of the ruling party, referring to the economic disparities that still prevail in the country along racial lines, adding that the ruling party needs to be honest about its failures in this regard and do things differently.
So when you look at the ownership of the economy and even the running of the economy, you'll know the Employment Equity Commission releases a report every year. Almost 70% of the CEOs of JSE-listed companies are white males. And this is, again, is 30 years into democracy. When you look at the ownership of the economy, black people still own less than 5% of the economy. I don't even want to talk about the ownership of the land and everything else.
The country's poor rail and port networks, and specifically Transnet, continue to make headline news, and this is an area many will hope the president speaks to directly, with possible interventions to improve the situation. The issue was top of the agenda for visitors attending this year's mining indaba.
70% of the people we spoke to, whether it's local or offshore business, the guys are saying we're extremely worried about Transnet. We're extremely worried about the state of the infrastructure that should service the logistics that will help South Africa to import and export. And we have seen our neighbor Mozambique, invest over $700 million to improve their facilities, because people are now looking at Mozambique as an alternative route for sending goods into the rest of the continent. So Transnet certainly does need to get the help that it requires to turn it around.
To resolve the country's energy and logistics issues, the government has had to court the private sector to tap into its investment capital and know-how. And some argue that despite the privatization word being considered a profanity among some in the ruling party and the tripartite alliance, this is probably the best shot the country has of improving its economic lot.
The private sector has just carried on regardless, and this has prevented the economy from collapsing completely. And one would hope to see a commitment on the part of the president to continue working with the private sector to try and incorporate it more and more into trying to resolve a lot of the issues that the government has proved to be incapable of dealing with.
Meanwhile, Black Business says the government needs to be more focused on supporting the SME sector, given its job-creating potential.
We will raise the issues of access to funding, access to the market, because if you don't have those two, you can have all these other enterprise development programs where they teach you how to type an Excel spreadsheet, but if you don't have access to funding and access to the market, it doesn't matter. And then that should be done by utilizing government institutions, the IDCs of this world.
The BBC says institutions like the Industrial Development Corporation and the Public Investment Corporation need to invest in more unlisted companies to invest in up-and-coming black businesses. It says there needs to be the professionalization of the public service to avoid black professionals being compromised by dodgy political principles. While the SONA is eagerly anticipated yet again, It remains to be seen whether it will materialize into action that affects the lives of ordinary South Africans in a material way. Nompumelelo Siziba, SABC News, Johannesburg.